Hello everyone, in today's video I'm going to give you the 8 basic interactions you need to get started playing Hardened Scales. Number 1. Modular. Modular is the backbone of the deck. Modular is a two-part ability that it always says Modular 1 or Modular 2 in the case of Scrapyard Combiner. This is featured on 3 cards: Arbon Worker, Arbon Ravager, and Scrapyard Combiner. How it works: the first part of the ability is Modular 1 means that this creature, it's a 0/0 that enters the battlefield with 1 in this case, or X, Modular X, or 1/1 counters on them. And then the second part of the ability is when this creature dies, and dying means going to the graveyard. If it gets exiled, has not died. If it's bounced to your hand, it has not died. So if it dies, whichever way it has died, then you can put the same amount of counters that the creature had on another creature. Modular is importantly, the second part of Modular is importantly a trigger. So when the creature dies, it will trigger Modular, and then you need to select a target right then. So when the creature dies, you get a trigger, and then you put the trigger on the stack, selecting one of the creatures you control or your opponent controls. Modular can actually target any artifact creature, and you need to be careful with that because Spellskite can redirect the counters to Spellskite. But since you may move the counters, even if Spellskite redirects the counters, you can say no to the trigger and then it will not get the counters. Number 2, Hardened Scales. Hardened Scales is basically the reason to be playing this deck. What it does is at any time a creature would get a +1/+1 counter on it, it gets those many +1/+1 counters plus 1 more. So it is what is called in Magic a substitution effect. So the creature will get for example, an Arbon Worker, as we talked before, that has Modular 1, enters the battlefield with 1/1 counter. It has Hardened Scales in the battlefield. At the moment that Arbon Worker enters the battlefield, then it will have 2 counters. The main implication of this is every time Arbon Ravager sacrifices an artifact, it will get 2 counters onto it instead of 1, meaning that you can effectively double the amount of counters that you're playing with. Interestingly, if you have 2 Hardened Scales and a creature will get 1/1/1 counters, it will get 3/1/1 counters. So there's no strange interaction there. You just add 1 extra counter per Hardened Scales you control. But you can imagine the more Hardened Scales you have, the quicker you can acquire counters and the quicker you can kill your opponent. Number 3 is the Ozolith. The Ozolith is the newest addition to the deck if you discount Lurus, and it's basically what has put the deck back to being a contender to be a competitor into this modern metagame. What the Ozolith does is that it allows anytime a creature that had a counter on it that you control to leave the battlefield, and it is important to notice that it's leave the battlefield, then those counters that the creature has will be moved onto the Ozolith. For example, if a creature gets bounced by the Fairy Time Raveler, whichever counters that creature had will go into the Ozolith. If a creature gets passed to exile, those counters will also go to the Ozolith. So it doesn't work like Modular, where the creature needs to die. It's anytime creature leaves the battlefield. Then at the beginning of each combat of your turn, there will be a trigger on the Ozolith that will move the counters on the Ozolith to whichever creature it's in the battlefield. It can be your own creatures, it can be your opponent's creatures. For example, if you get -1/-1 counters on the Ozolith, you can put those counters on the opponent's creatures. That works really well with Infect and sometimes against a Soulscar Mage. So the main idea will be that at that moment you can move the counters, and what this does effectively is that anytime you have a creature with counters, it doubles the amount of counters, right? Because if you have a worker that has a 1/1 counter on it, you sacrifice it, then you will move the counter to another creature, and that counter that the worker had, it will go onto the Ozolith as well. So you can put it on a creature, effectively working sort of like a Hardened Scales that also makes us more resilient to removal, especially path to exile. Lastly, the drawback of the Ozolith compared to Hardened Scales is the Ozolith is legendary, so you cannot have 2 at the same time on the battlefield. That means that it doesn't work like Hardened Scales, that the more you have, the better. This actually, in fact, you would rather only draw 1 unless it gets destroyed, and then of course you would like to have another 1. Number 4, animation module. Animation module has 2 modes as well. That comes with a bit of complication of the deck. Animation module has a triggered ability and activated ability. The triggered ability is every time a counter would be a +1/+1 counter will be put on any permanent you control. That can be a land, for example, Llanowar reborn, a creature, most commonly, or the Ozolith. There will be a trigger on the animation module. And then you may pay 1, you may, so you don't have to. If you don't have the mana, it's okay. If you want to use your mana for something else, that's also okay. You can pay 1 mana, and you will make a servo. And that servo will be just a 1/1 servo with no abilities. So basically, you can use this anytime you have excess mana to create servos that then you can sacrifice, you can attack your opponent with, and you can block. And they're basically free cards onto the battlefield. That's ability number 1. Ability number 2 on the animation module, it means that you pay 3 and you tap the animation module, and you have to target a permanent or a player. And you basically give it another counter of a kind that the permanent already has. Most commonly, you will get a +1/+1 counter on one of your creatures or on one of your lands, but sometimes animation module can be used to put poison counters on your opponent. Number 5, Metallic Mimic. Metallic Mimic is a sort of a newer addition to the deck. And what basically does is, as it enters the battlefield, you need to name a creature type. Creature type, for our purposes, will normally be construct, but you can name any creature type. So when a creature of that type enters the battlefield, it will enter with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. The point here is that if you name construct with Metallic Mimic and then you cast a Hangava Walker or a Ballista for X = 0, they will come in with a counter on. That means that basically you can deploy your whole hand very quickly because you have to pay no mana for it. In addition to this, if you decide to pay mana for the Walking Ballistas, you play, for example, 2 mana, so you have X = 1. Instead of coming in with 1 counter, you will come in with 2 counters onto play. Working sort of like a proto-hardened scales. On top of that, Metallic Mimic for our deck, can name also Beast. You name Beast, it means that you have 1 or 2 Ravagers in your hand. Ravager is not a construct, it's a beast. And when it comes onto the battlefield, it will get an additional counter. Then, on top of this, at the late game, you can name Servo or you can name Topter. And how it works is if you name Servo and you have an animation module, anytime you put a 1/1 counter on a permanent you control, then you can pay 1. When you pay 1, they will make a servo that will come in with a +1/+1 counter, and that will trigger animation module, effectively allowing you to spend your whole mana to make servos each turn. There will be at least 2 servos, and not 3 or more if you have hardened scales. So how it works is when you create a servo, it comes with a +1/+1 counters that triggers animation module again, you pay again, and you create another servo that also has a +1/+1 counter, and you basically can use your whole mana that way. With Topter works similarly, and the reason you want to name Topter is because when Hangava Walker dies, it creates the same amount of Topters, as many Topters as +1/+1 as counters it had. So then all the Topters will have +1/+1 counters, and you can use them basically to end the game rather quickly. Number 6 is Infect. Infect is a bit of a weird one because it allows you to kill your opponent without actually dealing damage to them. Instead of doing damage when an Inkmoth Nexus or an Infect creature deals damage to a player, what it does is it gives it a 1/1 an Infect counter. This Infect counter, what happens is that the moment you get 10, you die. So basically, it's like Infect had some kind of double damage. That damage cannot be prevented, and there's no way to take, at least unless you have very special cards in your deck, there's no way to get rid of those poison counters. It also, when an Inkmoth Nexus deals damage to a creature, it will give it a -1/-1 counter. So instead of dealing damage to it, it will just deal -1/-1 counters to those creatures. That means that is one of our avenues to winning is to put in 9 counters, 9 +1/+1 counters on Inkmoth Nexus, and attacking, generating 10 poison directly onto our opponent. Number 7 is Llanowar Reborn. Llanowar is a pretty simple one. It has graft. So it means it will enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on a land. I know, it's kind of strange. This counter does not get doubled by Hardened Scales because Llanowar Reborn is not a creature, but it does trigger animation module. So anytime any creature, yours and your opponent, enters the battlefield, then you can decide there is a trigger basically on the graft, and then you can decide to move that counter onto the creature or not. Particularly interesting it is when you want to deal with a creature that doesn't have an enter the battlefield effect before it can be, for example, sacrificed. Namely, this applies to Neoform. So when an Allosaurus Rider enters the battlefield, Llanowar 1 will trigger and you can actually dismember it in response, for example. There's a little trick that sometimes will win you the game. Most of the time though, this is just used to give yourself an extra counter. So you play a Ballista, and instead of being a 1-1 for 2, it will be a 2-2 for 2. Or in case you have Hardened Scales, it will also double. So you can pay 2 mana, make a Ballista with 2 counters on, then the graph triggers, you move that counter to the Ballista, and you end up with a Ballista as a 4-4. 8 is Welding Jar. Welding Jar is a bit of a weird one because it's a mechanic that has been phased out of the game that uses mechanic Regenerate. So what Regenerate does is you tap a creature that was regenerated and you take it out of combat. So you cannot use Welding Jar to push damage or push an Infect towards your opponent. If you have to use a Welding Jar, the creature will be, or artifact in this case, will be removed from combat. And what it does is the next time we will be destroyed or receive lethal damage, you prevent that damage. Regenerate does not work if the card specifies it cannot be regenerated, like Village specifies that, and it also doesn't work against Dismember. So if you get your creature's toughness becomes 0, the creature will die anyway, even though it has a regeneration shield on top because you sacrifice the Welding. And now a bonus because I don't know how to count. Proliferate. Proliferate is mainly featured in the card Son of Geth, which is one of my favorite cards on the deck. And what it does basically is you can sacrifice a creature and you choose any number of permanents on the battlefield or players and give it an extra counter of the counters that I already own. For example, if you have a 1-1 Ballista and you proliferate, then you can give it a +1/+1 counter. If your opponent has a creature that has a -1/-1 counter, you can give it another -1/-1 counter. That's relevant sometimes with Demon Nexus. You can proliferate your Planeswalkers. If you have Planeswalkers, you can also proliferate your opponents, but don't do that. And you can, interestingly, proliferate poison counters on your opponent. So much like animation model, you can kill your opponent through repeated usage of Throne of Geth, proliferating the one poison counter you gave them once. That sometimes comes up in the control or very long match. So yeah, that is the video. I know I covered basically only basic stuff, so this is only the basic interactions, but I wanted to make this video first so everybody that's watching the channel is on the same page on what the cards actually do. I know I mostly just read the cards, but sometimes that's kind of hard to do. And from now, I will try to make new videos explaining more strategy, explaining how to get better at the game with Hardened Scales, and explaining my plans for different matchups and what is the difference between sideboarding and having a plan, etc. So there'll be a lot of this kind of content coming up. But before I went into like harder or deeper topics, I just wanted to talk about the basic interactions that any Hardened Scales player should not only know, but they should dominate. They should really be good at these basics if you want to be a successful Hardened Scales player, because I tell you what, your opponent will not be as confident in all the little nuances of the basics of a Hardened Scales. So maybe they miscalculate how many counters you have on the battlefield, and then you can beat them this way. Yeah, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please let me know down below. Like, comment, subscribe. I really appreciate it. We already 100 subscribers. That's super nice. I've never expected to get those many, but that's awesome. Thanks a lot for everyone that's subscribed. And if you have a friend that wants to start with Hardened Scales, there's a video, maybe you can send it to them. Maybe not. Maybe you can teach them yourself. That's also fun. Or you can send them to my Twitch and I can teach them over time. But of course, we may be talking things that are too advanced for somebody that's just new. Thanks. I'll see you next time.